Hey guys, tonight we are going to time travel. Not in a whizzing, flashing, back to the future kind of way. More like stepping into a very, very fragrant bath of Roman history. Imagine the sun beating down on cobblestones slick with, well, everything. You hear the shouts of merchants, the rumble of carts, the distant chanting from a temple. And the smells? Oh, the smells. A potent cocktail of spices, sweat, animals, and less savory things we'll definitely be discussing. Let's just say, if you were suddenly transported to ancient Rome, your modern immune system would probably stage a full-blown rebellion. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I'm always curious to see who's falling asleep with me around the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are walking down the Via Sacra, the main street of ancient Rome. It's not quite how you pictured it from those gladiator movies, is it? For one thing, it's crowded. Shoulder to shoulder with senators in their togas, slaves carrying burdens, and street vendors hawking their wares. And let's be honest, it's pretty gross. You're doing your best to avoid stepping in questionable puddles. The air itself is thick. Incense from the temples mixes uneasily with the stench of, well, let's just call it organic waste. Remember, this is before the joys of modern plumbing, before the porcelain throne became a standard fixture in every home. In fact, most Romans didn't have homes, at least not in the way we think of them. They lived in apartment buildings called insulae, often several stories high, and generally lacking in, shall we say, sanitary facilities. Now, here's a mainstream historical fact for you. The Romans were incredible engineers. They built aqueducts that stretched for miles, bringing fresh water into the city. 11 major aqueducts, in fact, supplying Rome with hundreds of millions of gallons of fresh water every day. That's enough to fill a lot of bathtubs. But where did all that water go after it was used? That's where things get interesting and a little less pleasant. You see a group of men gathered around what looks like a public toilet. It's essentially a long stone bench with holes cut into it, all lined up in a row. No privacy whatsoever. And underneath, a constantly flowing stream of water meant to carry away the evidence. Now, this is where the quirky tidbit comes in. Remember those sponges on sticks you've heard about? Yeah, those were the Roman equivalent of toilet paper. And get this, they were communal. One sponge, many bottoms. Lovely, isn't it? You're suddenly very grateful for the invention of Charmin. But hold on, it gets even more fascinating. You notice that these public toilets are often located near bathhouses or thermae. In fact, some scholars believe that the waste from the toilets was actually used to fertilize nearby gardens. Think about that for a moment. The vegetables you might be eating could have been fertilized with human waste. Suddenly, that organic salad doesn't sound quite as appealing, does it? You decide to move on, eager to escape the olfactory assault. As you walk, you notice that the streets are surprisingly clean in some areas. That's because the Romans actually had a system of street cleaning. Slaves were employed to sweep the streets and collect the garbage. But even with their best efforts, it was a constant battle against the sheer volume of waste produced by a city of over 1 million people. And that brings us to a scholarly debate. How effective was Roman sanitation, really? Some historians argue that the Roman aqueducts and sewer systems were a triumph of engineering that significantly improved public health. Others point out that the vast majority of the population didn't have access to these amenities, and that disease was rampant. It's true that life expectancy in ancient Rome was relatively low, around 25 years. And while disease wasn't the only factor, it certainly played a major role. You pass a group of children playing in the street. They seem oblivious to the squalor around them. They're kicking around what looks suspiciously like a deflated animal bladder. You shudder to think. And then you remember something else. The Romans didn't have garbage cans. People just threw their trash into the street. That included everything from food scraps to broken pottery to, well, you get the picture. Sometimes, the accumulated garbage would become so high that it would block the streets. Imagine trying to navigate a city where you're constantly wading through piles of trash. It's no wonder that the Romans had a reputation for being tough. You had to be tough just to survive the daily commute. You were starting to feel a little overwhelmed. The noise, the smells, the sheer chaos of it all. It's a far cry from the sanitized version of ancient Rome you've seen in movies and books. And then you spot it, a therme, a public bathhouse. The architecture is impressive, even from the outside. Massive arches, ornate columns, and statues of gods and emperors. You can hear the sounds of splashing water and laughter coming from within. The thermi were more than just places to get clean. They were social centers, places where people could relax, exercise, and socialize. They were the Roman equivalent of a modern-day spa, a gym, and a community center all rolled into one. And they were open to everyone, rich and poor alike, though there were often separate hours for men and women. You decide to step inside, hoping for a respite from the squalor of the streets. The air inside is noticeably cleaner, thanks to the constant flow of fresh water. You see people of all ages and social classes lounging in the various pools, chatting, and enjoying themselves. The atmosphere is surprisingly relaxed and convivial. But even here, in this oasis of cleanliness, there are reminders of the realities of Roman life. You notice that the floors are covered in mosaics, beautiful works of art depicting scenes from mythology and everyday life. But you also notice that the mosaics are often stained and cracked, and that the grout is filled with grime. It's a constant battle to keep things clean, even in the most luxurious surroundings. And then there's the question of hygiene. Remember those communal sponges? Well, the same principle applied to the bathwater. Everyone was bathing in the same water, which was only changed periodically. You can imagine the potential for the spread of disease. It's a wonder that anyone survived the experience. You take a deep breath and try to focus on the positive aspects of the therme. The warm water, the soothing atmosphere, the sense of community. It's a welcome escape from the chaos of the city. But you can't help but wonder about the unseen dangers lurking beneath the surface. The bacteria, the viruses, the parasites. It's enough to make you want to run screaming back to the safety of your own shower. But you stay because you're a dedicated historian, or at least you're pretending to be one for the sake of this video. And you know that even in the midst of the squalor and the disease, the Romans were able to create a civilization that was both remarkable and enduring. And that, in itself, is something worth exploring, even if it does require holding your nose from time to time. All right, let's settle in a little deeper, shall we? The sounds of the city are starting to fade, just a little. Imagine that Roman market we were just strolling through, the one brimming with questionable fish and even more questionable characters. You are starting to feel the need to hydrate. But where do you even get water in early Rome? I mean, before all the fancy aqueducts and the public baths that haven't even been built yet in our historical timeline? Well, my friend, you're not exactly spoiled for choice. Forget Evian, forget Perrier. Back then, it was all about rivers and wells. And let me tell you, neither option was exactly a spa experience. You're standing on the banks of the Tiber, the very lifeblood of Rome, or so they'd like you to believe. It's brown, very brown. Like, did someone just dye the river with 1,000 rusty togas? Brown. And the smell? A delicate bouquet of, well, let's just say it's an acquired scent. Think low tide, mixed with unwashed sheep, and a hint of whatever that guy over there is selling from that cart. Is that pickled dormice? Yikes, you dip your hand in. Don't drink it. Seriously, don't. You can practically see the sediment swirling around. This is pre-chlorination, pre-filtration, pretty much everything that makes water drinkable. This water is teeming with, well, let's just call them microscopic friends that you definitely don't want to invite into your digestive system. But hey, desperate times, right? People did drink from the Tiber. They had to. It was one of the main sources of water for the city. They probably just filtered it through a cloth, maybe said a little prayer to Neptune, and hoped for the best. You can almost taste the grit already. Now, if you're a bit more discerning, or maybe just lucky enough to live near one, you might have access to a well. Ah, the well. Sounds quaint, doesn't it? Picture a stone structure, maybe with a little wooden bucket attached to a rope. You crank the handle, the bucket descends with a satisfying thunk, and then you haul it back up, dripping with hopefully relatively clean water. These early Roman wells were often privately owned, meaning they were a status symbol. If you had a well, you were doing all right. You weren't relying on the Tiber and its contents. You could lord it over your neighbors a little bit. Oh, this water? Straight from my well. So crisp, so refreshing. You wouldn't understand. But even wells weren't a guarantee of purity. Groundwater could still be contaminated, especially in a densely populated area like Rome. Remember all those lovely smells we talked about? Well, they weren't just hanging in the air. They were seeping into the ground, too. And guess where that groundwater eventually ended up? Yep, in your well. So, you're cautiously drawing a bucket of well water. You notice it's a little cloudy. Maybe you'll boil it first. Maybe you'll just stick to wine. Wine was safer, after all. De gustibus non est disputandum, as they say. There is no accounting for taste, or, in this case, avoiding dysentery. And that brings us to a slightly less palatable point: sanitation. Or rather, the lack thereof. We touched on this in our last little ramble, but it bears repeating. Early Rome was fragrant, and all that fragrance had to go somewhere. You see, before the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's grand sewer system, was fully functional, waste disposal was rudimentary. Let's just say that chamber pots were a common household item, and their contents were often unceremoniously dumped out the window, into the street, near the Tiber, near the wells. You get the picture. So, when you're considering that glass of Tiber water, or even that slightly less suspicious well water, remember what might be lurking within. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? Now, while we're on the topic of early Roman water sources, let's delve into a slightly more unconventional theory. Some historians, and by some, I mean a small, but vocal minority, believe that early Romans also relied on, wait for it, rainwater harvesting. I know, it sounds almost modern, but hear me out. They had roofs, right? And it rained sometimes, right? So, wouldn't it make sense to collect that rainwater in cisterns or large containers? The evidence is, well, it's thin. There aren't a lot of surviving cisterns from that early period, and written accounts are scarce. But the proponents of this theory argue that it's just common sense. Why wouldn't they have used rainwater? It's free, it's relatively clean, compared to the Tiber anyway, and it's readily available. It's a nice idea, isn't it? Picture early Romans carefully collecting rainwater, storing it in terracotta pots, and using it for drinking and washing. It paints a picture of resourcefulness and ingenuity. But, until more evidence surfaces, it remains just a theory. A fringe theory, perhaps, but a theory nonetheless. Maybe they just used it to wash the togas. And that brings us to one of those lovely little historical debates that keep academics employed. Historians still argue about the precise role of springs in early Roman water supply. We know they existed, and we know some were considered sacred, even having temples built nearby. But how important were they in providing drinking water to the general populace? Some argue that springs were crucial, especially in the early days, providing a reliable source of clean water before the aqueducts were built. Others contend that springs were more of a supplementary source, used primarily for religious purposes or by those who lived close by. The debate rages on, fueled by fragmented archaeological evidence and conflicting interpretations of ancient texts. You can almost hear the hushed tones of academics arguing in dimly lit libraries, poring over ancient maps and texts, debating the merits of spring water versus well water. It's a thrilling, if slightly nerdy, spectacle. But back to you, standing by that well, bucket in hand. You're starting to appreciate the simple luxury of clean drinking water, aren't you? You're also probably wondering when those Romans are finally going to get their act together and build some decent plumbing. Well, my friend, that's exactly where we're headed next. But for now, let's just take a moment to appreciate the sheer grit and determination of those early Romans, who managed to survive and thrive despite the challenges of finding and securing clean water. They were tough, resourceful, and probably had incredibly strong immune systems. And they probably smelled interesting. But hey, they built an empire, didn't they? And they did it all with brown river water and questionable wells. So, the next time you turn on the tap and enjoy a glass of ice-cold water, take a moment to remember those early Romans and be grateful for the marvels of modern plumbing. You know, it could always be worse. You could be drinking Tiber water. Sweet dreams. All right, settle in, because we're about to dive into something truly groundbreaking. Or, well, ground undergrounding, I suppose. We're talking about the Aqua Appia, Rome's very first aqueduct. Imagine, if you will, the Rome we've just painted, teeming with life, ripe with aromas, and increasingly thirsty. Remember those wells and the Tiber River? Yeah, not cutting it anymore. The population is exploding, and even the best-maintained well can only provide so much nice, clean-ish water. Something's got to give, and that something, my friend, is engineering. Specifically, Roman engineering. You are now standing on the outskirts of Rome, maybe around 312 BC. You're wearing sturdy sandals. Trust me, you'll want them, and squinting in the Mediterranean sun. You can hear the rhythmic clang of hammers and the shouts of, well, probably some colorful Roman curses. Construction is in full swing. And it's not just any construction. It's the Aqua Appia snaking its way towards the city like a giant, buried earthworm. Now, this aqueduct, conceived by Appius Claudius Caecus, say that 3 times fast, was a game changer. A total game changer. The mainstream historical fact here is that the Aqua Appia was roughly 16 kilometers long, mostly underground. 16 kilometers. That's a lot of walking, especially when you're carrying heavy stones and trying to avoid tripping over loose gravel. You see these workers, right? Some are digging trenches, others are carefully laying stones, and still others are mixing mortar. It's backbreaking work, but they know, or at least they hope, that this aqueduct will bring fresh, clean water right into the heart of Rome. Less reliance on questionable wells, fewer waterborne illnesses. It's a recipe for a healthier, happier, and less smelly Rome. Remember that scent of everything from our first mental image? This, hopefully, is going to dilute it a little. The genius of the Aqua Appia lies in its simplicity and its reliance on gravity. The aqueduct is built with a slight, consistent downward slope, allowing water to flow naturally from its source, springs located to the east of Rome, all the way to the city. No pumps, no fancy machinery, just good old-fashioned physics. It's like a really long, slightly angled slip-and slide for water. And because most of it is underground, the water is protected from contamination and evaporation. Clever, right? These Romans, they weren't just conquering the world. They were conquering the challenges of urban living. Now, for a quirky tidbit. While the Aqua Appia was primarily underground, there were some sections that ran above ground, supported by arches. And legend has it, and I stress the word legend, because this is where things get a little fuzzy, that Appius Claudius Caecus, the mastermind behind the whole project, actually had a section of the aqueduct run through his own property. Talk about convenient. Imagine having your own private water source, fed directly from the city's main supply. That's like having your own personal tap into the municipal beer keg. Just kidding mostly. Of course, this raises some ethical questions, doesn't it? Was Appius Claudius Caecus using his position for personal gain? Did he have to pay a water bill? Historians, and I use that term loosely when discussing legends, still debate whether this story is true or just a bit of juicy gossip that got passed down through the centuries. But it's a fun little detail to consider, isn't it? Power and privilege, some things never change, even in ancient Rome. You can almost taste the fresh water now, can't you? But let's get back to the construction. The Aqua Appia wasn't just a ditch in the ground. It was a carefully engineered structure, built with precision and skill. The Romans used a type of concrete called opus cementitium, which was incredibly durable and waterproof. This concrete was made from a mixture of volcanic ash, lime, and aggregate, like stones and rubble. It's the same stuff they used to build the Colosseum and the Pantheon, so you know it's good stuff. And speaking of construction, the Romans were masters of surveying and leveling. They used instruments like the groma and the chorobates to ensure that the aqueduct had the correct slope. These instruments were surprisingly accurate, allowing them to build aqueducts that could span vast distances with minimal elevation loss. It's like they had a giant, ancient spirit level. But here's where it gets really interesting. Building an aqueduct wasn't just about engineering and construction, it was also about politics and power. The Aqua Appia was a public works project, funded by the state and overseen by government officials. This meant that it was subject to all sorts of political maneuvering and bureaucratic red tape. Imagine the ancient Roman equivalent of permit applications and environmental impact assessments. You can almost hear the senators arguing about the budget and the best route for the aqueduct. Through my property, of course, for the good of the people. And who got to use the water from the Aqua Appia? Well, that was another source of contention. Initially, the water was primarily used for public fountains and bathhouses. This meant that everyone, rich and poor, could benefit from the aqueduct. But as the population of Rome grew, and as private wealth increased, more and more water was diverted to private homes and businesses. Suddenly, having access to fresh, clean water became a status symbol. This leads us to another scholarly debate. How equitable was the distribution of water in ancient Rome? Some historians argue that the water system was relatively fair, providing basic access to everyone. Others argue that the wealthy elite were able to monopolize the water supply, leaving the poor with little more than trickles. It's a complex issue with no easy answers, but it's clear that water, even in ancient Rome, was a valuable and highly contested resource. You're following the Appia now, walking alongside it, imagining it whole, complete, functional. It's dark and cool down here, even on a hot Roman day. You can hear the faint gurgle of water flowing through the channel. It's a sound that promises relief, health, and, well, maybe slightly less of that ever-present Roman funk. The Aqua Appia had a profound impact on the city of Rome. It provided a reliable source of fresh water, which improved public health and sanitation. It allowed the city to grow and prosper, and it set the stage for the construction of even more ambitious aqueducts in the future. It was, in short, a symbol of Roman ingenuity and power. It also probably helped keep the togas a little cleaner, and it wasn't just about practical benefits. The Aqua Appia also had a symbolic significance. It represented Rome's ability to control and manipulate nature, to harness the power of water for the benefit of its citizens. It was a testament to Roman engineering prowess and a symbol of the city's ambition and grandeur. It was a way of saying, we are Rome, and we can do anything. So, the next time you turn on the tap and enjoy a glass of clean, refreshing water, take a moment to think about the Aqua Appia. Think about the Roman engineers who designed it, the laborers who built it, and the citizens who benefited from it. Think about the political machinations and the ethical dilemmas that surrounded it. And think about the fact that, even thousands of years ago, people were grappling with the same challenges that we face today: how to manage resources, how to distribute wealth, and how to build a better future. It all starts with a little water flowing gently downhill. You feel that? The cool air, the subtle sound of moving water. It's almost hypnotic. Just let it wash over you. Let the story of the Aqua Appia lull you into a peaceful slumber. You've earned it. All right, settle in a little deeper there. Let's drift into the aqueducts. Aqueduct engineering, gravity's gift. So, you're standing just outside the city walls of Rome. Maybe a little dusty, definitely a little aromatic. You've followed one of these aqueducts, the Aqua Appia, perhaps the granddaddy of them all, out into the countryside. And you're probably thinking, okay, it's a channel. A really, really long channel. What's the big deal? Well, my friend, the big deal is gravity. Pure, unadulterated, ancient Roman gravity-powered plumbing. You're not going to find any electric pumps out here. Not even a little hand-cranked one. They didn't have them. Imagine, if you will, that you're an ancient Roman engineer. You have a problem. You need to get fresh water from a source, a spring, a lake, even a river, miles away, and you need to get it into the city consistently, reliably, and without it becoming a stagnant breeding ground for, well, you remember the smells from earlier. Your solution? A gently sloping channel, built with incredible precision. And when I say gently sloping, I mean gently. We're talking a drop of maybe a few feet per mile. It doesn't sound like much, does it? But over the course of miles and miles, that slight incline is enough to keep the water flowing steadily downhill, using nothing but the Earth's own gravitational pull. It's like letting a toddler walk down a very, very shallow slide. Slow, but inevitable. You're walking alongside the aqueduct now. You notice the construction. The earliest ones, like the Aqua Appia, are mostly underground. Think of them as glorified tunnels, cut through the earth, lined with stone. It's dark and damp in there, and probably home to all sorts of creepy crawlies. Later aqueducts, though, those are the showstoppers. You see sections that rise above the ground on massive arches, striding across valleys like stone centipedes. Think about the materials. You're looking at concrete, Roman concrete, which, let's be honest, is kind of a miracle material. It's not quite the same as modern concrete. It's made with volcanic ash, lime, and aggregate, and it has this amazing ability to harden over time. In fact, some Roman concrete is stronger now than it was when it was first poured. Try telling that to your local construction crew. Yeah, that's great, buddy. Now get back to work. You run your hand along the surface of the aqueduct. It's rough, a little porous. You can feel the age in the stone. You can almost hear the echoes of the Roman engineers, barking orders at the workers, making sure every stone is perfectly placed. And if you listen really closely, you might hear the faint sound of water gurgling its way towards the city. Now, here's something a little quirky. You know how sometimes you see pictures of Roman aqueducts and they're covered in scale? Like mineral deposits? Well, that's plumbum lead. Many aqueducts used lead pipes in certain sections, especially near the city itself. And yes, that meant that the water flowing into Roman homes and bathhouses contained lead. Dun dun dun. Now, before you start panicking about the Romans all being slowly poisoned by lead, let's add a little nuance. The water in Rome was generally very hard, meaning it contained a lot of minerals, especially calcium. This calcium actually helped to coat the inside of the lead pipes, creating a barrier between the lead and the water. So, while there was definitely lead in the water, it wasn't necessarily at levels that would cause immediate, acute poisoning. Chronic, long-term exposure? That's another story, and the subject of passionate scholarly debate. Historians still argue fiercely about the extent to which lead poisoning affected the Roman population. Some argue that it was a major factor in the decline of the Roman Empire, contributing to everything from infertility to mental illness. Others argue that the levels of lead were relatively low and that other factors, like disease and warfare, were far more significant. Who's right? Well, that's what makes history so much fun, isn't it? It's never quite as simple as you think. And you see, that's the genius of the aqueducts. They are a testament to Roman ingenuity, their understanding of physics, and their ability to organize and execute massive engineering projects. You're not just looking at a channel for water. You're looking at a symbol of Roman power, Roman ambition, and Roman, well, hygiene, sort of. Remember, they weren't just drinking this water. They were bathing in it, using it to flush their latrines, and generally making their lives a little less fragrant. Think about the logistics involved. Surveying the land, calculating the slope, quarrying the stone, transporting the materials, and managing the thousands of workers needed to build these things. It's mind-boggling. And all without modern surveying equipment, power tools, or even a decent cup of coffee. You might be wondering, okay, so they built these amazing aqueducts, but how did they know how to do it? Well, that's a good question. And the answer is a combination of observation, experimentation, and good old-fashioned trial and error. The Romans were incredibly practical people. They weren't afraid to try things out, see what worked, and then refine their techniques. They also learned from other cultures, particularly the Greeks, who had already been experimenting with aqueduct construction for centuries. The Romans just took it to a whole new level. Think of it as the difference between a community college art project and something at the Louvre. Both art, but one had a little more funding. Speaking of learning from others, here's a fringe tidbit for you. Some believe that the Romans also consulted with, well, let's just say diviners or water witches to help them locate underground water sources and determine the best routes for their aqueducts. There's not a whole lot of solid evidence to support this, of course, but it makes for a fun story, doesn't it? Imagine a Roman engineer standing in the middle of a field with a forked stick, trying to sense the presence of underground water. Yes, I feel a definite gurgle this way. Build the aqueduct this way. You can almost see the eye rolls of the centurions. Now, you're following the aqueduct closer to the city. You notice that it branches off into smaller channels, distributing water to different parts of Rome. Some of these channels lead to public fountains, where people can collect water for drinking and cooking. Others lead to private homes, the homes of the wealthy, of course. And still others lead to those magnificent public baths we were talking about earlier, those glorious temples of cleanliness and relaxation. It's all connected, you see. The aqueducts, the fountains, the bathhouses, even the latrines. It's a complex system, a web of pipes and channels that brought fresh water into the city and carried waste away. It wasn't perfect by any means, but it was a remarkable achievement for its time. And it transformed the city of Rome, making it a cleaner, healthier, and more livable place. Well, at least comparatively speaking. It's still Rome, after all, and you, standing here, you can almost feel the weight of history, the echoes of the Roman engineers, the murmur of the water, the faint scent of, well, something vaguely less unpleasant than it used to be. Take a deep breath. Let it all sink in. You are a witness to the power of Roman engineering, the ingenuity of the human mind, and the simple, elegant beauty of gravity. Now, isn't that wonderfully boring? All right, settle in. because now we're diving into the juicy details of where all that lovely aqueduct water actually went. You've seen the aqueducts arching across the countryside, felt the cool breeze whispering through their arches. Now, imagine you're in Rome. The year is, let's say 100 AD. You're strolling through the city, the sun warm on your face. Or, let's be honest, probably dodging a rogue chamber pot emptying from a window. And you hear it, the constant, gentle murmur of water. You follow the sound and come to a public fountain. Not just any fountain, mind you, but a castellum divisorium. Think of it as a Roman water distribution hub. It's a large, often ornate, structure with multiple spouts gushing fresh, clean water. These castella were strategically placed throughout the city, acting like miniature aqueduct terminuses. They weren't just pretty, they were essential. These castella were the end point of one aqueduct before the water was divided and sent to other parts of the city. You watch as people gather, filling amphorae, watering their animals, or just splashing their faces to escape the Roman heat. This water, provided freely to all citizens, was a cornerstone of Roman life. Can you imagine the collective sigh of relief when that first aqueduct, the Aqua Appia, finally started flowing? No more relying solely on the Tiber, with all its interesting contents. Now, they have fresh water available to them. The fountains themselves were often dedicated to gods and goddesses, a little thank you note to the divine for this liquid gift. You might see statues of nymphs, Neptune, or even local water deities adorning these structures. It's not just plumbing. It's practically a religious experience. Now, not everyone got their water straight from the fountain. Some people, the wealthier Romans, had private water connections plumbed directly into their homes. Imagine that luxury. You're lounging in your atrium, a gentle fountain bubbling in the corner, a constant reminder of your status and wealth. But here's the catch. Getting a private connection wasn't exactly straightforward. You needed permission from the water authorities, and you had to pay for it. These private connections were usually made with lead pipes, plumbum in Latin, which, incidentally, is where we get the word plumbing. I know, mind blown, right? It's a callback to Section 1 when we talked about the sounds of the city. The sound of dripping water would always be present in your house. Now, here's a fun fact. These lead pipes might have contributed to lead poisoning among the Roman elite. Historians still debate the extent of this, but the idea of emperors slowly going mad from lead-laced water is certainly intriguing. It's ironic, isn't it? The very thing that brought them comfort and status might have also been slowly poisoning them. Think about that the next time you're tempted to drink from a suspiciously old-looking fountain. But it wasn't just homes that benefited from the aqueducts. Industry also relied heavily on this constant supply of water. Think about it. Mills for grinding grain, laundries for cleaning clothes, remember all those togas? And even mines for extracting valuable resources. All of these industries needed water, and the aqueducts provided it in abundance. You see a bustling laundry nearby. Steam rises from the large vats where workers are stomping on piles of dirty clothes. The water, constantly flowing, helps to remove the grime and dirt, leaving the togas sparkling white, or at least as white as they could get in ancient Rome. The sound of the water mixing with the sound of the laundry workers creates a symphony of productivity. Mills were another major consumer of water. These mills, powered by water wheels, ground grain into flour, a staple of the Roman diet. You can imagine the constant churning of the water wheel, the rhythmic grinding of the stones, and the satisfying sight of freshly ground flour pouring into sacks. It's a testament to the ingenuity of Roman engineers, who harnessed the power of water to feed their growing population. Even mining operations relied on water. Hydraulic mining techniques, where water was used to erode soil and rock, were employed to extract valuable minerals like gold and silver. It was a destructive process, no doubt, but it was also incredibly effective. The Romans were masters of resource extraction, and they weren't afraid to use water to get what they wanted. Now, here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some enterprising Romans even used aqueduct water to create elaborate water features in their gardens. Think fountains that sprayed water in intricate patterns, artificial waterfalls cascading over rocks, and even water-powered automata, little mechanical toys that moved and danced with the help of water pressure. Imagine inviting your friends over to show off your latest water-powered contraption. Behold, my mechanical singing bird. powered by the finest aqueduct water Rome has to offer. Of course, all this water distribution required careful management. The Romans had a sophisticated system of water officials who were responsible for maintaining the aqueducts, regulating water flow, and preventing illegal tapping. These officials, often slaves or freedmen, played a crucial role in ensuring that everyone got their fair share of water. You see one of these officials, a stern-looking man with a clipboard and a measuring rod, inspecting a public fountain. He's checking the water pressure, looking for leaks, and making sure that no one is illegally diverting water. He takes his job very seriously, knowing that the well-being of the city depends on the proper functioning of the water system. Now, here's where it gets a little complicated. Historians still debate the fairness of water distribution in ancient Rome. While public fountains were theoretically open to everyone, there's evidence that the wealthy often used their influence to secure preferential access to water. They might bribe water officials, build larger private connections, or even divert water from public fountains to their own estates. It's a classic case of the rich getting richer, even when it comes to water. And it raises a fundamental question. Was the Roman water system truly a public good, or was it just another tool for reinforcing social inequality? It's something to ponder as you drift off to sleep. You can almost feel the weight of the water in the aqueducts, the constant flow, the lifeblood of the city. You can hear the splashing of the fountains, the churning of the water wheels, and the murmuring of the crowds gathering to collect their daily water. It's a symphony of water, a testament to the ingenuity and ambition of the Roman Empire. And all this water, remember, is coming from miles away, flowing downhill, defying gravity. Well, sort of. All thanks to those incredible aqueducts you learned about earlier. It's a complex system, a delicate balance of engineering, politics, and social dynamics. But it's also a system that sustained a vast and powerful empire for centuries. So, next time you turn on the tap, take a moment to appreciate the long and fascinating history of plumbing, and remember the ancient Romans who brought water to the masses. Well, most of them, anyway. You see, even back then, water was power. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Good night. Het fan night. All right, settle in. You're doing great. Just breathe. In and out. Good. Now let's really dive into the baths. Think of Roman public baths as, well, imagine if your local YMCA also served as a community center, a spa, a library, and a gossip mill all rolled into one steamy, marble-clad package. It was the place to be seen, especially if you were anyone of note. You are walking down a bustling Roman street. The sounds of vendors hawking their wares fading slightly as you approach a grand, imposing structure. The air, still carrying a faint hint of the city's, let's call it robust, aroma, is now overlaid with a more pleasant scent, a mix of oils, perfumes, and the faint, clean smell of warm water. You're about to enter a Roman bathhouse. And trust me, it's an experience. First, you pay a small fee, usually just a few quadrants, practically pocket change. Even slaves and the poor could usually afford entry, making it a truly democratic space, at least in principle. Of course, like everything else in Rome, there were unspoken class divisions even within the baths, but we'll get to that. You notice a mosaic on the floor depicting Neptune, god of the sea, reminding you that water, in all its forms, was considered a gift from the gods. Remember those aqueducts we talked about? All that beautifully engineered water, gravity-fed and flowing, ending up right here. Quite the accomplishment, really. You enter the apoditerium, the changing room. Think of it as the locker room, but with more marble and fewer sweaty gym socks. You disrobe. Hopefully you remembered to bring a towel and hand your clothes over to a bath attendant. These guys were notorious for being light-fingered, so keep a close eye on your valuables, or better yet, leave them at home. You might consider it the ancient Roman equivalent of airport security, slightly stressful, but ultimately necessary. Now, the fun begins. You have a few choices. You could start with the caldarium, the hot room. The air here is thick and humid, the temperature bordering on unbearable for the uninitiated. You feel the sweat immediately bead on your forehead. Romans would often use a strigil, a curved metal scraper, to remove the sweat and grime. Imagine that, scraping yourself clean. It sounds unpleasant, doesn't it? But apparently, it was quite effective, and probably smelled a lot better than letting it dry. Or, you could head to the tepidarium, the warm room. This was a more moderate space, designed to acclimatize you to the temperature changes. Think of it as the Roman equivalent of a pre-sauna warm-up. It's a good place to relax, chat with friends, or just be. Then there's the frigidarium, the cold room. After the intense heat of the caldarium, plunging into a pool of cold water was supposed to be invigorating. I personally can't imagine anything worse, but hey, to each their own. It's said to close your pores and something else. Honestly, I am not sure, but it sounds good. Maybe it makes you live longer. But the baths were so much more than just a place to get clean. They were social hubs. Political deals were brokered here. Gossip was exchanged, and friendships were forged. You might find senators discussing affairs of state, merchants negotiating prices, or just ordinary citizens catching up on the latest news. Imagine the Roman version of Twitter, but instead of 280 characters, it's whispered in a steamy room. And it wasn't just conversation. Many bathhouses had libraries, exercise areas, and even gardens. You could work out, read a scroll, admire the statues, or just stroll through the greenery. It was a whole-day affair for some. You might even catch a poetry reading or a musical performance. Think of it as a Roman version of a modern-day resort, but without the overpriced cocktails and screaming children. Okay, maybe there were screaming children. Romans had those too. Of course, there were rules. Bathhouses generally had separate hours for men and women, although there were periods when co-ed bathing was practiced, much to the chagrin of some of the more conservative citizens. And there were definitely social hierarchies at play. The wealthy could afford to bring their own attendants and perfumes, while the poor had to make do with whatever was available. You might notice certain areas of the bathhouse being more crowded than others, a subtle reflection of the social strata within Roman society. Now, for a slightly peculiar tidbit. Some Romans believed that bathwater had medicinal properties. They would drink it, use it to treat skin conditions, and even believe it could cure certain ailments. I'm not sure I'd recommend trying that with your local pool water today, but hey, who am I to judge ancient Roman medical practices? Maybe there was something to it. Maybe not. Let's just say I'd stick to modern medicine, personally. And speaking of debates, historians still argue about the extent to which Roman bathhouses contributed to the spread of disease. On the one hand, the constant flow of water helped to flush out waste and keep things relatively clean. But on the other hand, the warm, humid environment was also a breeding ground for bacteria and fungi. It's a bit of a double-edged sword, really. Did the benefits of hygiene outweigh the risks of infection? It's a question that continues to fascinate scholars today. You see a lot of the same plumbing principles here that you did in the aqueducts, just on a smaller, more localized scale. The hypocaust system, for example, used underfloor heating to warm the rooms, circulating hot air through a network of hollow tiles. Ingenious, really. They were masters of engineering, those Romans. And they knew how to relax. But let's not romanticize it too much. Imagine the noise, the splashing, the shouting, the endless chatter. And let's not forget the smell. Despite the perfumes and oils, there was still the underlying scent of, well, of a lot of people in close proximity, sweating and scrubbing. It probably wasn't quite as idyllic as the movies portray it. Still, the Roman public baths were an incredible achievement. They were a testament to Roman engineering prowess, a reflection of Roman social values, and a vital part of daily life for centuries. They were more than just a place to get clean. They were a place to connect, to relax, and to be part of a community. And now, as you emerge from the bathhouse, feeling refreshed, hopefully, you can appreciate just how much these ancient Romans valued their water. From the mighty aqueducts that brought it to the city, to the intricate plumbing systems that distributed it to the baths, water was essential to their way of life. So, next time you take a shower, spare a thought for the ancient Romans and their elaborate bathing rituals. And maybe, just maybe, consider investing in a strigil. I'm kidding. Please don't do that. Just appreciate the clean water. And maybe take a nap. You've earned it. All right, settle in. Because now we're going to actually go to the baths. Not physically, of course. Unless you happen to have a time machine lying around. Which, if you do, please call me. But mentally, imaginatively, we are now entering the grand, steamy world of the Roman Thermae. Picture this. You're approaching the baths of Caracalla, or Diocletian, or Trajan. Take your pick. They were all pretty impressive. The sheer scale of the building is, well, intimidating. It's larger than a modern shopping mall, shimmering with marble, and buzzing with the murmur of hundreds of voices. Remember how we talked about the Cloaca Maxima? Well, hopefully, you don't smell it as you approach, but let's be honest, a hint of antiquity probably lingers in the air. Think of it as Ode to Roman Empire. You pay your entrance fee, a pittance, really, for the average Roman citizen. It was often subsidized by the emperor, because keeping the populace clean and happy was a good way to avoid riots, you know? A little bread, a little bathing, and everyone's, relatively, content. Women are allowed, but often have separate hours or even separate, smaller bath complexes. Family time was not bath time. You step inside. The first thing that hits you is the noise. It's a cacophony of splashing water, echoing conversations, hawkers selling snacks, more on that later, and the general din of hundreds of people enjoying themselves. The air is thick with humidity and the faint scent of perfumed oils. It's intense. You head for the apoditerium, the changing room. Think of it as the ancient Roman equivalent of a gym locker room, only grander and probably slightly less hygienic. You find an empty niche in the wall. No individual lockers here, just open cubbies, and carefully place your clothes. Hopefully, you trust your fellow bathers, because theft wasn't exactly unheard of. You might even hire a slave to watch your belongings, if you were feeling particularly paranoid or wealthy. Now, Starkers, you proceed to the first stop on your bathing tour, the frigidarium. The frigidarium is a large, unheated pool of cold water. Bracingly cold, shockingly cold, even. This isn't a gentle, lukewarm dip. This is a plunge into something that would make a polar bear think twice. The idea is to invigorate you, to shock your system awake. It's the ancient Roman version of an ice bath, and just as unpleasant, if we're being honest. You gasp as you submerge yourself, your skin prickling with goosebumps. You'll probably only endure a few minutes. Think of it as a test of Roman fortitude. You survive. Barely. Next up, the tepidarium. Ah, sweet relief. The tepidarium is a moderately warm room, designed to ease you into the hotter temperatures to come. It's like a sauna's waiting room. You wander around, letting your body adjust, maybe chatting with friends or acquaintances. Some tepidaria even had underfloor heating, a precursor to modern radiant heating systems. Imagine marble floors gently warming your feet. Blissful. You might get a massage here from a skilled or not-so-skilled masseur. They would use oils and strigils, curved metal scrapers, to remove dirt and sweat from your skin. Yes, scrapers. Sounds lovely, doesn't it? And now, the grand finale, the caldarium. The caldarium is the hottest room in the thermi. Think of it as a sauna and steam room rolled into one. The air is thick and heavy with moisture, and the temperature is, well, let's just say you wouldn't want to spend too long in there. The Romans used a hypocaust system, an underfloor heating system fueled by a furnace, to heat the caldarium. Hot air circulated beneath the floor and through hollow tiles in the walls, creating a sweltering, almost unbearable heat. You slowly enter the caldarium, your skin instantly slick with sweat. You see other bathers lounging in small pools of hot water or sitting on benches, their faces flushed and glistening. Some are being attended to by slaves, who are fanning them with palm leaves or pouring cool water over their heads. You find a spot to sit and try to relax. It's difficult. The heat is oppressive, and the air is almost suffocating. But you persevere, knowing that this is the ultimate Roman bathing experience. You can almost feel your pores opening, releasing all the dirt and grime you've accumulated from the city streets. You can almost feel the stress melting away, replaced by a sense of, well, maybe not relaxation, but at least a sense of accomplishment. You've survived the caldarium. You've conquered the heat. You are a true Roman. But wait, there's more. After your steamy ordeal, you might opt for a swim in the Natatio, an open-air swimming pool. Or perhaps you'd prefer to work up a sweat in the palestra, a gymnasium where you could wrestle, lift weights, or play ball games. The Romans took their fitness seriously, even if their diet mainly consisted of bread and, well, whatever they could get their hands on. Historians still debate the exact dietary habits of the average Roman citizen, but it's safe to say that it probably wasn't as balanced as what your doctor recommends. And then, of course, there was the food. The thermi weren't just about bathing. They were also social hubs. Vendors would hawk snacks and drinks, everything from simple bread and cheese to more elaborate dishes. You might grab a bite to eat while you relax in the gardens or chat with friends in one of the many lounges. One quirky thing about Roman bathing. Sometimes, people would bring their own sponges on sticks to, well, let's just say to clean themselves in the public latrines. And yes, they shared them. Yikes. Think about that the next time you complain about a public restroom. After all that bathing, exercising, and socializing, you're probably feeling pretty tired. You head back to the apoditerium, retrieve your clothes, and emerge from the thermi feeling refreshed, rejuvenated, and slightly cleaner than you were before. You've experienced the Roman thermi in all its glory. And, fun fact, public baths weren't always a sign of cleanliness. Some historians argue that the communal nature of the baths, combined with the less than perfect hygiene practices, actually contributed to the spread of disease. So, while the Romans might have felt cleaner after a visit to the thermi, they might have actually been picking up a few unwanted souvenirs. Now, you might be thinking, wow, that sounds like a lot of work just to get clean. And you'd be right. But remember, the Roman thermi were more than just places to wash. They were social centers, recreational facilities, and symbols of Roman power and ingenuity. They were a testament to the Romans' ability to engineer complex systems and to create luxurious spaces for the enjoyment of their citizens. They were, in a way, the ancient Roman equivalent of a modern-day spa, gym, and community center all rolled into one. So, next time you take a long, hot shower, think about the Romans. Think about their aqueducts, their hypocausts, their frigidaria and caldaria. Think about the ingenuity and the sheer scale of their bathing complexes. And be grateful that you don't have to share a sponge on a stick with a bunch of strangers. All right, settle in, because now we're going to get warm. Really warm. We're diving deep, metaphorically, not literally. You just got out of the caldarium after all, into the ingenious heating system that made those Roman baths, and even some fancy villas, so darn toasty. The hypocaust. Imagine this. You're back in that Roman bathhouse, maybe the baths of Caracalla, all that marble gleaming softly in the lamplight. You've gone through the frigidarium, braced yourself in the tepidarium, and now you're luxuriating in the caldarium, the hot room. The air shimmers with heat, but your feet? They aren't burning on the floor. In fact, it's pleasantly warm. Not ice-cold marble, like you'd expect, but a gentle, embracing warmth. That, my friend, is the magic of the hypocaust. The word itself comes from the Greek, hypo meaning under and caust meaning burnt. So literally, burnt underneath. A very apt description. You see, beneath the floor of the caldarium, and sometimes even the tepidarium and laconicum, the dry sweating room, was a network of pillars, usually made of stacked tiles or brick, called pili stacks. These pili stacks supported the floor above, creating a void, a space between the actual floor you're walking on and the ground beneath. This void is where the hot air circulated. Now, where does this hot air come from? That's where the prefernium comes in. The prefernium was essentially a furnace, a stoking room, usually located outside the main bathing area to keep the smoke and fumes away from the bathers. Slaves, because, well, ancient Rome would constantly feed the furnace with wood, coal, or whatever fuel they could get their hands on. The hot air and smoke from this furnace were then channeled into the underfloor space through flues. Think of it like a giant, very inefficient, underfloor heating system. But hey, it worked. And it was incredibly sophisticated for its time. You are now imagining the poor slaves in the prefernium, sweating profusely as they shovel fuel into the furnace. It's a far cry from the relaxing atmosphere of the caldarium. You make a mental note to be extra grateful for your modern central heating system. And maybe tip your HVAC technician extra well next time. But the ingenuity doesn't stop there. The Romans also understood the importance of ventilation. Clay pipes, called tubuli, were embedded in the walls of the bathhouse. These tubuli acted as chimneys, drawing the hot air upwards and through the walls, effectively heating the entire structure. This also helped to prevent the buildup of dangerous carbon monoxide. Pretty smart, huh? You reach out and touch the wall. You can almost feel the heat radiating from within, even though the furnace hasn't been lit for centuries. It's a testament to the effectiveness of the system. Now, here's a mainstream historical fact for you. The hypocaust wasn't just used in bathhouses. Wealthy Romans also installed them in their villas to keep their homes warm during the colder months. Imagine having underfloor heating in your house 2,000 years ago. Talk about being ahead of the curve. Although, having slaves to stoke the furnace was probably key to enjoying that luxury. Let's wander into slightly quirkier territory, shall we? You might be surprised to learn that the Romans weren't the inventors of the hypocaust. Evidence suggests that the ancient Greeks were experimenting with similar underfloor heating systems even earlier. The Temple of Ephesus, for example, had a system that some consider a precursor to the Roman hypocaust. So, while the Romans perfected and popularized it, they weren't necessarily the originators. It's like saying the iPhone was the first smartphone. Technically, not really. And now for a scholarly debate to really get those brain cells firing before you drift off. Historians still argue about the efficiency of the hypocaust system. Some claim that it was incredibly effective, providing consistent and comfortable heat throughout the bathhouse or villa. Others argue that it was actually quite inefficient, requiring vast amounts of fuel and constant maintenance. It probably depended on the size of the building, the quality of the construction, and the skill of the slaves tending the furnace. You can imagine that a poorly maintained hypocaust would be about as effective as trying to heat your house with a single candle in a blizzard. You ponder this debate as you walk through the ruins of the bathhouse. You can see the remains of the pily stacks beneath the floor, the holes where the tubuli were once embedded in the walls. It's a puzzle, a challenge to try to understand how this system worked, how effective it really was. Speaking of efficiency, it's worth noting that the Romans, ever resourceful, sometimes used the waste heat from the bathhouse furnaces to heat other areas, like the kitchens or even nearby workshops. Waste not, want not, right? They were practically inventing sustainable energy before it was cool. Well, hot actually. Very hot. You are thinking about the modern equivalent, heat recovery systems in industrial plants. The Romans would have been impressed. Or maybe they'd just be jealous they didn't think of it first. You also start to wonder about the social implications of the hypocaust. It clearly separated the haves from the have-nots. Only the wealthy could afford to install and maintain such a system in their villas. The vast majority of Romans would have had to rely on braziers or open fires for heating, which were far less efficient and much more dangerous. It's a stark reminder of the inequalities that existed in ancient Roman society. Just like the aqueducts, some got more water than others, and some got toasty warm while others shivered. Now, let's get back to imagining the tactile sensations. You're running your hand along a tubuli brick. It's rough to the touch, porous. You can almost feel the heat that once radiated from it, the warmth that chased away the chill of winter. You close your eyes and imagine the sounds. The crackling of the fire in the prefernium, the murmur of voices in the caldarium, the gentle whoosh of hot air circulating beneath the floor. It's a comforting, almost hypnotic sound. And you remember the smell, too. Not just the faint scent of wood smoke, but also the aroma of olive oil and perfumes used by the bathers. It's a complex, evocative smell that transports you back to ancient Rome. Hopefully a better smell than you imagined in Section 1 when you first arrived. You think about how clever the Romans were, how they used their engineering skills to create these incredible spaces of comfort and relaxation. The hypocaust was just one piece of the puzzle, but it was a crucial one. It allowed them to transform cold, damp buildings into warm, inviting havens. You are feeling sleepy now, the warmth of the imaginary hypocaust lulling you into a state of relaxation. You can almost feel the tension melting away from your muscles. One last thought before you drift off. Remember those aqueducts we talked about earlier? Well, the water they supplied was essential for the functioning of the hypocaust. The hot water used in the caldarium and other hot rooms was often heated by the same furnaces that powered the underfloor heating system. So, everything was interconnected, a complex web of engineering and infrastructure. It's all connected, like one giant, very old, Rube Goldberg machine. Although, arguably, much more effective than a Rube Goldberg machine. And warmer. Definitely warmer. Alright, that's enough about hypocaust for tonight. You've earned your rest. Sweet dreams of toasty Roman bathhouses. Alright, settle back in. We're going to talk about where all that stuff went. You've spent the day in Rome. You've marveled at the aqueducts, luxuriated in the baths, maybe even splashed around in a public fountain. Don't tell anyone. But all that water and all the other things that need to be disposed of, well, they had to go somewhere. And that somewhere, my friend, is the fascinating and often overlooked world of Roman waste disposal. Now, let's be honest, waste disposal isn't exactly the sexiest topic. It doesn't have the grandeur of an aqueduct arch or the steamy allure of a caldarium. But trust me, it's just as important. Without a way to get rid of waste, Rome wouldn't have been the thriving, sprawling metropolis it was. It would have been, well, a very smelly, very unhealthy, and probably much smaller version of itself. Imagine trying to enjoy that delicious garum if the air is thick with, well, you get the picture. So, you're walking down a Roman street. You notice something different. The air, shall we say, isn't quite as fresh as you'd hoped. Remember how we talked about the smells of Rome earlier? This is an advanced class in that sensory experience. Now, the Romans weren't exactly clueless about sanitation, but their methods were, shall we say, less than ideal by modern standards. The most famous element of Roman waste disposal is, of course, the Cloaca Maxima. You've probably heard of it. The Great Sewer. And it was great. In size, at least. Initially, it was an open drain, a channel to carry rainwater and waste away from the Forum. But over time, it was covered and expanded, becoming a massive underground sewer system that drained into the Tiber River. You can still see parts of it today, actually. You can walk near its entrance to the Tiber. Just maybe hold your breath. The Cloaca Maxima was a remarkable feat of engineering, especially considering its age. It's traditionally attributed to the Etruscans and later expanded by the Romans. Think about it. They built this thing centuries before the aqueducts we discussed. It's a testament to their understanding of drainage and their commitment, at least partially, to public health. Now, here's a mainstream historical fact for you. The Cloaca Maxima was so well built that it's still partially functional today, carrying rainwater away from the city center. I mean, that's impressive, right? Built millennia ago, and still doing its job. Though, I wouldn't recommend, testing it. But the Cloaca Maxima wasn't a universal solution. It primarily served the public areas of the city, the Forum, the markets, the public baths. Most private homes weren't directly connected to it. So, what did people do with their waste in those areas? Well, that's where things get a little less glamorous. For those not directly connected to the Cloaca Maxima, the most common solution was the cesspool. Basically, a large pit dug into the ground. You can imagine the aroma. These cesspools were often located in courtyards or back gardens. And, well, they filled up. Now, here's where things get a little quirky. There's evidence, from archaeological digs, that some wealthier Romans had what you might call chamber pots, portable toilets that could be emptied into the cesspool. Some of these were quite elaborate, made of ceramic or even metal. Imagine the Roman equivalent of a fancy toilet seat. And get this, some even had built-in sponges. Yes, sponges, attached to a stick, for wiping. Now, I know what you're thinking. Ew. But think about it. Toilet paper wasn't exactly a thing back then. And leaves, well, they're not exactly known for their absorbency. So, a sponge was probably a relatively luxurious option. Though, I wouldn't want to be the one in charge of cleaning that. And this brings us to our scholarly debate. Historians still argue about the extent to which Roman sanitation practices actually improved public health. On the one hand, the Cloaca Maxima and other drainage systems clearly helped to remove waste from the city center, reducing the risk of disease. On the other hand, cesspools were often poorly maintained and could contaminate groundwater. Plus, the Tiber River, into which the Cloaca Maxima emptied, was essentially a giant open sewer. So, did Roman sanitation make a real difference? Or was it just a case of moving the problem somewhere else? It's a complex question, and the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. They definitely tried, but their understanding of disease and hygiene was, understandably, limited compared to our own. Now, back to your stroll through Rome. You might also notice people emptying chamber pots directly into the street. Yes, you read that right. Gardaloo was a common cry, warning passers-by to watch out for falling debris. A charming custom, to be sure. Imagine trying to have a romantic evening stroll and having to dodge that. It certainly puts a damper on things, doesn't it? And speaking of charming customs, let's talk about public latrines. Remember those public baths we explored? Well, they often had attached latrines. These were communal affairs, with rows of stone or wooden seats, each with a hole. No privacy screens, no individual stalls. Just you and your fellow Romans, all doing your business together. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds awful. And, well, it probably was. But it was also a social occasion. People would chat, gossip, and conduct business while otherwise occupied. It was a bit like a Roman version of a water cooler, only smellier. And remember those sponges on sticks we talked about? Well, they were often shared in public latrines. Yes, shared. Can you imagine? I'm pretty sure that would violate every health code imaginable today. But hey, different times, different customs. The waste from these public latrines would often be flushed into the cloaca maxima or a local sewer system. So, at least there was some attempt at hygiene, even if it wasn't exactly up to modern standards. Now, let's get back to the aqueducts for a moment. Remember how all that water was flowing into the city? Well, some of that water was used to flush out the sewers. This was a crucial part of maintaining the system and preventing it from becoming completely clogged. You see, the Romans understood the importance of water flow in keeping their city clean, even if they didn't fully grasp the germ theory of disease. They knew that moving water could carry away waste and prevent stagnation. It's a simple concept, but it was essential to the functioning of their urban environment. And here's a little tidbit. Some Roman cities even had laws regulating waste disposal. For example, it was illegal to dump waste directly into the street during daylight hours in some areas. You had to wait until nightfall, presumably when fewer people were around to experience it. Though, I imagine the nocturnal air wasn't exactly fragrant either. So, as you drift off to sleep, imagine yourself back in ancient Rome. You're walking down a street, trying to avoid the less pleasant aspects of urban life. You hear the cry of "Garde à l'eau" and quickly step aside. You catch a whiff of something indescribable. But then, you see the magnificent arches of an aqueduct in the distance, a reminder of the ingenuity and ambition of the Roman civilization. And you think, well, at least they tried. And that, my friend, is the peculiar story of ancient Roman waste disposal. Not exactly a bedtime story for the ages, but hopefully, it's given you something to think about. Sweet dreams, and watch where you step. Okay, let's settle back, adjust your blanket, maybe fluff that pillow a little more. Good. Ready? Let's talk about sewers. Delightful, right? But trust me, even sewers can be soothingly boring. We're going deep, underground. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer. You are standing near the Forum Romanum, the heart of ancient Rome. The sun is beating down, and the air, well, it's ripe. Remember that bouquet of interesting aromas we discussed earlier? Yeah, it's all here. But beneath your feet, flowing unseen, is a marvel of engineering. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer. Imagine it, a vast, subterranean channel, a dark and echoing space carrying away the city's leavings. It's not a pretty picture, admittedly, but it's a vital one. Without it, Rome wouldn't have been Rome. It would have been a stinky, disease-ridden swamp. Even more so, anyway. The Cloaca Maxima, which translates roughly to greatest sewer, wasn't just some afterthought. It was a fundamental part of Rome's urban planning, dating back to the Etruscan kings, centuries before the Republic or the Empire. Legend says it was built by Tarquinius Priscus, one of the early kings, around the 6th century BC. That's a really long time ago. Think about it. Before concrete as we know it, before sophisticated surveying equipment, they managed to build a massive underground drain that still functions, in parts, today. You peer down a, hopefully well-maintained and safe, access point. You notice the stonework, massive blocks fitted together with impressive precision. The sewer itself is surprisingly large in some sections, easily big enough for a small boat to navigate. In fact, there are stories, probably exaggerated, but still fun to imagine, of Romans actually using boats to inspect and maintain the Cloaca Maxima. Can you imagine? Honey, I'm off to work. Don't forget to feed the cat and bail out the sewage boat. The mainstream historical fact here is that the Cloaca Maxima was, and still is, a testament to Roman engineering prowess. It wasn't just a ditch. It was a carefully designed system that helped to drain the marshy areas of Rome, particularly around the Forum, making them habitable and usable. It helped prevent flooding and, crucially, carried away waste. Now, for our quirky tidbit. Remember those public latrines we talked about? Well, some historians speculate, and I use the word speculate very loosely here, that there might have been, shall we say, unofficial races down the Cloaca Maxima. Think of it as the ancient Roman equivalent of extreme tubing, but with significantly less appealing water. The idea is that adventurous, or perhaps just foolish, individuals would use the sewer's currents for a rather unpleasant thrill ride. I'm not sure I'd sign up for that. Sounds like a good way to get a new skin disease. You can almost hear the faint echoes of, watch out for that thing. Yeah, let's just move on. The Cloaca Maxima wasn't just a single channel. It was a network. Smaller drains and channels fed into it from all over the city, carrying runoff from streets, waste from public baths, and, yes, the contents of those public latrines directly into the Tiber River, which, of course, then flowed downstream, providing refreshment to other communities. The joys of ancient sanitation. Speaking of the Tiber, the mouth of the Cloaca Maxima, where it emptied into the river, was located near the Pons Aemilius, one of the oldest bridges in Rome. This location was strategically chosen to ensure that the sewage was carried away by the river's current, minimizing the impact on the city center. Or, at least, trying to minimize the impact. You can imagine that the area around the mouth of the sewer wasn't exactly a tourist hotspot. Historians still debate the exact scope and construction phases of the Cloaca Maxima. Was it originally an open channel that was later covered? How much of the current structure dates back to the Etruscan period versus later Roman expansions and renovations? These are questions that archaeologists and historians continue to grapple with, piecing together the puzzle from archaeological evidence, ancient texts, and comparative studies of other ancient sewer systems. It's like a giant, smelly jigsaw puzzle, and I, for one, am happy to let them handle it. You can almost picture the Roman engineers surveying the land, planning the route of the sewer, and supervising the construction. They were practical, resourceful, and, let's face it, probably didn't get paid enough for the job they were doing. Imagine the smells they had to endure. I bet they had some very strong perfumes. Or maybe they just got used to it. The smell of sewage in the morning. Smells like victory. The Cloaca Maxima wasn't just about waste disposal. It was also about public health. By removing sewage and runoff, it helped to reduce the spread of disease and improve the overall living conditions in Rome. It was a crucial factor in the city's growth and prosperity. A healthy city is a productive city, and a productive city needs a really big sewer. Think back to those aqueducts we discussed. The aqueducts brought fresh water into the city, and the Cloaca Maxima carried the wastewater out. It was a closed-loop system, a rudimentary form of water management that was remarkably effective for its time. You might be thinking, well, dumping all that sewage into the Tiber River can't have been good for the environment. And you'd be absolutely right. But in the context of the ancient world, where the concept of environmental protection was, shall we say, less developed, the Cloaca Maxima was a necessary evil. It was a trade-off, a slightly polluted river in exchange for a significantly healthier city. Another quirky tidbit, and this one is more speculation than fact, but it's too fun to ignore. Some believe that the Cloaca Maxima was also used for secret purposes. Imagine clandestine meetings held in the depths of the sewer, secret messages passed between conspirators, and perhaps even illicit activities of a more, personal nature. It's the perfect setting for a spy novel, isn't it? The Sewer Serpent, perhaps? I'd read it. Or maybe not. You can almost hear the whispers echoing through the dark tunnels. The eagle flies at midnight. Meet me by the gurgle. Third, great from the splush. Forum. Okay, maybe I'm getting carried away. But the point is, the Cloaca Maxima wasn't just a sewer. It was a part of the city's infrastructure, its history, and its mythology. It was a symbol of Roman engineering, ingenuity, and, well, their willingness to deal with the unpleasant realities of urban life. And it's still there. Parts of it, anyway. Still flowing, still doing its job, centuries after it was built. That's pretty remarkable when you think about it. A testament to the enduring power of sewage management. So, the next time you flush your toilet, take a moment to appreciate the marvel of modern plumbing. And maybe spare a thought for the ancient Romans and their grand sewer. They may not have had all the comforts we have today, but they knew how to deal with things. Now close your eyes. Imagine the gentle sound of water flowing, slowly, steadily, through the Cloaca Maxima. It's a soothing sound, isn't it? A constant reminder that even the most unpleasant things can be, quietly, efficiently, taken care of. Sleep tight, and try not to dream about sewers, public toilets, social spaces, and hygiene. All right, settle back in. We've talked about the grand aqueducts, the luxurious baths, the less than luxurious sewers. Now, let's talk about where it all connects. Public toilets, or, as the Romans called them, latrini. You are walking down a bustling Roman street. The sounds of vendors hawking their wares, the rumble of carts, the general cacophony of a city with 1 million inhabitants washes over you. Remember that smell we talked about in the beginning? Yeah, it's still here. But nature calls, and fortunately, you know where to find the nearest latrina. You step inside, and, well, it's not exactly the Ritz-Carlton. Picture this, a long, open room, often with marble or stone benches running along the walls. These benches have strategically placed holes, sometimes keyhole-shaped, sometimes just round, for, no stalls, no privacy, just you, your fellow Romans, and the open air. Think of it as communal relief, ancient style. And I mean communal. These weren't quick in and out affairs for many Romans. They were social hubs. You'd meet friends, discuss politics, gossip about the latest chariot race results, all while taking care of business. Imagine that. Talking stocks while well, you get the picture. Can you imagine doing that today? Hey, Bob, great quarter. By the way, could you pass the chart and papyri? No, me neither. Now let's talk hygiene. Or, rather, the Roman attempt at it. You won't find any toilet paper here. Instead, you'd use a tersorium. This was essentially a sponge on a stick. One sponge, shared by everyone. Lovely, right? They'd keep it in a bucket of water, often with vinegar or salt, and everyone would use the same sponge. Just think about that for a moment. I'm starting to feel a little itchy just describing it. I know what you're thinking. That sounds incredibly unhygienic. And you're absolutely right. It's no wonder parasites and diseases were rampant. But hey, at least they tried, right? They understood the need for some kind of cleaning, even if their methods leave a lot to be desired by modern standards. Many latrini were located near or even connected to bathhouses. This made sense, as people would often relieve themselves before or after bathing. Plus, the water from the baths could be used to flush the toilets, which was a pretty clever bit of recycling, even if it wasn't exactly pristine water. The Romans also believed in the power of, well, let's call them toilet deities. Yes, even the toilet had a god or goddess assigned to it. One of the most prominent was Cloacina, the goddess of the sewers, whose shrine was supposedly built over the Cloaca Maxima. They believed these deities would protect them from evil spirits and ensure a smooth experience. Because nothing says piety like praying to a sewer goddess while never mind. Interestingly, the design of these public toilets often included decorative elements. Mosaics, frescoes, even statues could be found adorning the walls. It's like they were trying to distract you from the reality of the situation. A little ancient Roman interior design to offset the aromas. You almost have to admire the effort. Now, here's a quirky little fact for you. Some latrini even had heated seats. Not all of them, of course. That was reserved for the more upscale establishments or private villas. But imagine that, a warm marble seat on a chilly Roman morning. That's the kind of luxury I could get behind, even with the shared sponge situation. Maybe. Speaking of private villas, wealthy Romans often had their own private toilets, usually located near their kitchens or bedrooms. These were, unsurprisingly, much more luxurious than the public ones. They might have had marble seats, elaborate decorations, and even running water for enhanced hygiene. Of course, they still didn't have toilet paper, but hey, baby steps. Now, let's delve into a bit of scholarly debate. Historians still argue about the exact level of sanitation in Roman public toilets. Some believe that the Romans were relatively clean for their time, doing the best they could with the resources available. Others argue that the conditions were appalling, contributing significantly to the spread of disease. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in the middle. They certainly understood the concept of hygiene, even if their execution was questionable. One thing is for sure, the existence of public toilets highlights the Roman understanding of the importance of sanitation, even if that understanding was, shall we say, imperfect. They recognized the need to manage waste and provide a place for people to relieve themselves. And in a city as large and densely populated as Rome, that was no small feat. Consider the logistics for a moment. Feeding 1 million people is one thing. Disposing of their byproducts is another. The Romans may not have had all the answers, but they were certainly asking the right questions. And they built some impressive infrastructure to deal with the output of their vast population. Remember the Cloaca Maxima we talked about? That massive sewer was the final destination for much of the waste from these public toilets. It flowed into the Tiber River, eventually making its way to the sea. Not exactly environmentally friendly by today's standards, but hey, they didn't have the EPA back then. It was more of a get it out of sight, get it out of mind approach. So, The next time you're sitting on your porcelain throne, contemplating the wonders of modern plumbing, take a moment to think about the ancient Romans. They may not have had the luxury of soft toilet paper or scented hand sanitizer, but they did have a system, a flawed, smelly, communal system, that helped to keep their city functioning. And that, in its own peculiar way, is a pretty remarkable achievement. And hey, at least you don't have to share a sponge with strangers. Small victories, right? Now let's move on to, okay, settle in, because this next bit, well, it's less refreshing dip in the tepidarium and more slightly concerning historical detail. We're diving headfirst into the murky world of lead poisoning. Lead pipes, a poisonous problem. You see those gleaming lead pipes snaking their way through the Roman city, delivering fresh, aqueduct-fed water to your villa? Beautiful, aren't they? Elegant. So, Roman. And slowly poisoning you. Yep, lead. The Romans loved lead. They used it for everything. Pipes, obviously, but also for lining cooking pots, making cosmetics, even sweetening wine. I mean, who needs honey when you've got lead acetate? It's got that metallic tang. Don't try this at home, kids. The thing is, the Romans weren't entirely oblivious to the dangers of lead. Vitruvius, the famous Roman architect and engineer we mentioned way back when we were talking about aqueduct construction, even warned against using lead pipes, noting that plumbers suffered from lead poisoning. He suggested using clay pipes instead. But, well, lead was just so darn convenient. It was malleable, easy to work with, and relatively cheap. Clay pipes, on the other hand, were more fragile and required more skill to install. So lead it was. Imagine you're a wealthy Roman, luxuriating in your private bath, the warm water cascading over you, all thanks to your fancy lead plumbing. You feel a little off, maybe a bit tired, a persistent headache. You chalk it up to overindulging in dorm ice at last night's dinner party. But slowly, subtly, the lead is accumulating in your system. You might notice your gums developing a bluish line, the telltale lead line. Your digestion might get a little unpredictable, and you might find yourself becoming increasingly irritable. You snap at your slaves for the slightest infraction. You accuse your spouse of, well, various things. All perfectly normal for a Roman aristocrat, of course. But maybe, just maybe, it's the lead talking. Now, here's the thing about lead poisoning. It's insidious. It affects different people in different ways, and the symptoms can be vague and easily attributed to other causes. And the Romans, bless their toga-clad hearts, didn't exactly have access to modern diagnostic tools. So, they just kept drinking the lead-laced water, blissfully unaware of the slow, creeping damage it was doing. And it wasn't just the wealthy elite who were affected. Remember those public fountains we talked about? Many of them were also fed by lead pipes. So, everyone, from the emperor to the humblest plebeian, was getting a daily dose of lead. It was truly the democratic poison. Everyone got a little bit. One mainstream historical fact to remember is that the Latin word for lead is plumbum, which is where we get the word plumbing. Isn't that delightfully ironic? The very system designed to bring clean water to the masses was, in fact, slowly poisoning them. It's like naming your exterminator company the Roach Resort. Now, let's get into some quirkier territory. There's a theory, a rather controversial one, that lead poisoning played a significant role in the decline of the Roman Empire. The argument goes something like this. Chronic lead exposure led to widespread infertility, cognitive impairment, and general ill health among the Roman population, particularly the ruling classes. This, in turn, weakened the empire from within, making it more vulnerable to external threats. It's a compelling narrative, isn't it? The mighty Roman Empire, brought down not by barbarian hordes or economic collapse, but by bad plumbing. Like, imagine Attila the Hun showing up at the gates of Rome, and the emperor just kind of shrugs and says, "Sorry, Attila, too busy dealing with this splitting headache. Probably just need more lead-sweetened wine." Of course, this theory has its critics. Many historians argue that the evidence is circumstantial and that other factors, such as political instability, economic decline, and climate change, were far more important in the fall of Rome. They point out that lead exposure was likely variable and that not everyone would have been affected equally. Plus, Romans certainly faced a lot of other challenges, like constant wars and the occasional bout of bubonic plague. Lead was just one ingredient in a very complicated stew of societal problems. But the idea that lead poisoning contributed to the decline of Rome is certainly provocative. It makes you think. It makes you wonder what other seemingly innocuous aspects of our modern lives might be slowly undermining our health and well-being. Is it the microplastics in our water? The blue light from our screens? The constant barrage of information? Only time will tell. And that brings us to the scholarly debate. Historians still argue fiercely about the extent to which lead poisoning affected Roman society. Some argue that it was a major contributing factor to the empire's decline, while others dismiss it as a minor irritant. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in between. It's likely that lead poisoning had a negative impact on the health and well-being of the Roman population, but it was just one of many factors that contributed to the complex and multifaceted decline of the empire. One of the difficulties in assessing the impact of lead poisoning is that it's hard to know exactly how much lead Romans were exposed to. We can analyze lead levels in their bones and teeth, but this only gives us a snapshot of their exposure over time. It doesn't tell us how long they were exposed, at what levels, or what other factors might have influenced their susceptibility to lead poisoning. And, of course, not everyone is equally susceptible. Children and pregnant women are particularly vulnerable to the effects of lead. It's also important to remember that the Romans weren't completely ignorant of the dangers of lead. As we mentioned, Vitruvius warned against using lead pipes, and some Roman writers even noted that lead workers were prone to illness. So, it's not like they were completely clueless. They just chose to ignore the warnings, because lead was just so darn convenient. Sound familiar? It's amazing how often human beings will prioritize convenience over long-term health. Think of it this way. It's like knowing that eating a whole pizza every night is bad for you, but doing it anyway because it's just so easy and delicious. And pizza. So, next time you turn on the tap for a glass of water, take a moment to appreciate the fact that your pipes are probably made of something other than lead. And thank the Romans, in a way, for unwittingly teaching us a valuable lesson about the importance of public health and environmental safety. They may have built magnificent aqueducts and bathhouses, but they also left us with a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked technological progress. And with that sobering thought, maybe it's time to, all right, settle in. Let's talk about, maintenance. Yeah, riveting, I know. But someone had to keep all this watery wonderfulness. Well, wonderful. It wasn't magic, you know. You're now standing beside a section of the Aqua Claudia, maybe a little north of Rome. The sun is beating down, even this late in the afternoon. You can hear the constant rush of water inside the aqueduct, a sort of watery white noise. But today, the noise is different. It's choppy, uneven, like someone's gargling with rocks. Not good. You see a team of aquarii, aqueduct maintenance workers, scrambling around a section where the stone arches have started to sag ever so slightly. These guys are the plumbers, the civil engineers, the first responders of the Roman water system. They're not exactly glamorous. Think, hard hats made of leather, tunics perpetually damp, and the general air of someone who's spent way too much time arguing with gravity. Their job is simple: keep the water flowing, day in, day out. And believe me, that was no easy task. Imagine the sheer scale of the Roman aqueduct system. Hundreds of miles of channels, both above ground and underground, snaking their way across the countryside. Every single inch of it needed to be inspected, maintained, and repaired. Think of it like your home's plumbing, only magnified by, a couple thousand%. And instead of calling a plumber who charges by the hour, you're relying on a state-funded team who are probably grumbling about their lunch break. You watch as one of the aquarii chips away at a section of the stone with a hammer and chisel. He's probably looking for cracks, or maybe evidence of root intrusion. Yeah, tree roots. Those sneaky little jerks are the bane of every civil engineer, even back then. They burrow into the smallest cracks, seeking out moisture, and before you know it, you've got a full-blown botanical invasion happening inside your perfectly good aqueduct. Another worker is down in the channel itself, wading through the water. He's using a long pole to dislodge debris. You can see leaves, branches, the occasional dead rat. You know, the usual suspects. The water is surprisingly clear, considering everything. But it's also cold. Like, shockingly cold. You shiver just looking at him. He's probably used to it, though. Or maybe he's just really good at faking it. The real challenge, though, wasn't just clearing out debris. It was dealing with the structural issues. Earthquakes, landslides, erosion, all of these things could wreak havoc on an aqueduct. And when an aqueduct failed, it wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a major crisis. No water meant no public baths, no fountains, no flushing toilets. Well, fewer flushing toilets, and potentially no water for industries like milling grain. In short, it meant a very unhappy populace, and you do not want an unhappy populace in ancient Rome. Trust me on this one. So, the Aquarii were constantly patching things up, reinforcing weak points, and even rebuilding entire sections of aqueduct when necessary. They used a variety of materials, including stone, brick, concrete, and even lead. Ah, yes, lead. We talked about that before, didn't we? The Romans were masters of engineering, but their love affair with lead was, well, let's just say it wasn't the healthiest relationship. You see them mixing a batch of opus cementitium, Roman concrete. It's a mixture of lime, volcanic ash, pozzolana, and aggregate. This stuff was incredibly strong and durable. You almost feel like you should ask them for the recipe for your driveway back home. But then you remember that you'd need a volcano, and maybe that's a bit much. They carefully apply the concrete to a cracked section of the aqueduct wall. It's slow, painstaking work, but they know that every little bit helps. Every patch, every repair, every cleared out obstruction, it all adds up to keeping the water flowing and keeping Rome running. Now, here's a fun fact for you. The Aquarii even had their own union. Okay, maybe not a union, with collective bargaining and strike action. But they did have a guild, a collegium, that protected their interests and ensured that they were properly trained and compensated. Not bad, right? I mean, I bet they got decent dental. Probably. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some Aquarii were rumored to use, well, let's call them unconventional methods for finding leaks. Legend has it that they would release trained ferrets into the aqueducts. The ferrets, with their keen sense of smell and their ability to squeeze into tight spaces, could supposedly sniff out the source of a leak. Now, I don't know about you, but the image of Roman plumbers chasing ferrets through underground aqueducts is just inherently amusing to me. Historians still debate about the exact organization and hierarchy of the Aquarii. Were they all state employees? Were some of them private contractors? And just how effective were those ferrets, really? These are the questions that keep historians up at night, you know. Well, some historians. Probably the ones who specialize in Roman plumbing. You watch the Aquarii work for a while longer. The sun is starting to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. The air is cooling down, and you can hear the crickets chirping in the distance. It's a peaceful scene, despite the ongoing repairs. You start to appreciate the dedication and skill of these unsung heroes of Roman civilization. They weren't generals or senators or emperors. They were just ordinary people doing their jobs day in and day out. But without them, Rome would have been a very different place. A much thirstier, smellier place. It's easy to take clean water for granted. We turn on the tap, and it's just there. But in ancient Rome, getting water to the city was a monumental achievement. And keeping it flowing required constant vigilance and effort. You think about all the other things that we take for granted today. Electricity, the internet, indoor plumbing, all of these things require constant maintenance and upkeep. And there are people out there, working behind the scenes, to make sure that everything keeps running smoothly. Maybe we should all take a moment to appreciate the Aquarii of the modern world. The plumbers, the electricians, the IT professionals, they're the ones who keep our civilization afloat. Literally, in the case of the plumbers. And speaking of floating, I think it's time for us to float off to sleep. But first, just one more thought. Next time you take a shower, or flush the toilet, or grab a glass of water, remember the ancient Romans. Remember their aqueducts, their bathhouses, their lead pipes. And remember the Aquarii, those tireless workers who kept the water flowing, even when the ferrets weren't cooperating. Sweet dreams. And try not to dream about leaky pipes. Unless you're into that sort of thing. No judgment. All right, settle back in. Maybe fluff your pillow a little, because now we're going to talk about what happens when the party ends. Think of it like the lights coming on at the club, and you realize that questionable stain on the floor definitely isn't spilled soda. We're diving into the decline and fall of Roman plumbing. You're standing in what was once a bustling Roman city. The air, which once vibrated with the sounds of construction and commerce, is now quiet. Eerily so. The aqueducts, those magnificent arteries of civilization, are beginning to show their age. Cracks spiderweb across their surfaces. You notice, Where once a steady stream gurgled, only a trickle remains, like an old man trying to clear his throat. It's subtle at first, this decline. A little slower to fix a leaky pipe here, a bit less funding for the aquarii, those dedicated water maintenance workers we talked about before. Remember them? The guys who risked their necks crawling through dark, dank tunnels? Yeah, well, their paychecks are getting smaller, and the tunic budget? Forget about it. One of the first things to suffer, naturally, are the public baths. You see the grand thermae, once gleaming with marble and echoing with laughter, slowly falling into disrepair. The mosaics are cracked, the caldarium is cold, and the water in the natatio, the swimming pool, is, well, let's just say you wouldn't want to take a dip. There's a certain algae bloom situation happening. The hypocaust system, that ingenious underfloor heating we discussed, is sputtering. Fewer slaves are available to keep the fires stoked, and the knowledge of how to properly maintain the system is slowly being lost. It's like trying to explain how to program a VCR to your grandma. Only the VCR is keeping an entire bathhouse from freezing. You walk past a public fountain, once a source of clean, fresh water for all citizens. Now, it's stagnant. The intricate carvings are covered in grime, and the water smells suspiciously like, well, let's just say you'd rather drink from a puddle. And that's saying something, considering the Roman penchant for questionable sanitation practices even at their best. Remember those public toilets? Yeah, imagine them now. Shudder. What happened? Well, it's a complicated story, as all good historical declines are. The Roman Empire, as you might know, didn't exactly go out with a whimper. It was more of a drawn-out, agonizing groan, accompanied by barbarian invasions, economic woes, and political instability. Think of it as a really, really bad breakup. One major factor was, of course, the constant warfare. Maintaining those vast aqueduct networks required resources, manpower, materials, and, crucially, funding. When the legions are busy defending the borders from Visigoths and Vandals, there's not a lot of time or money left over for fixing leaky pipes. It's hard to prioritize plumbing when someone is trying to burn your city to the ground. And speaking of barbarians, many of them had absolutely no clue how the Roman water systems worked. They were more interested in looting and pillaging than in maintaining complex engineering marvels. To them, an aqueduct was probably just a really long, inconveniently placed wall. Smash it, they probably yelled. It's in the way of my raiding party. The decline in trade and economic activity also played a significant role. As the empire crumbled, cities shrank, and populations dwindled. Fewer people meant less demand for water, which meant less revenue to maintain the aqueducts. It's a vicious cycle, like a toilet that keeps flushing itself in the middle of the night. Annoying and ultimately unsustainable. And then there's the issue of expertise. The Romans were masters of engineering, but that knowledge wasn't always passed down effectively. As the empire weakened, the skills and knowledge needed to build and maintain the aqueducts gradually faded away. It's like losing the recipe for your grandma's famous lasagna. Generations later, you're stuck with a sad, watery imposter. You see evidence of this everywhere. Makeshift repairs using inferior materials. Sections of aqueduct abandoned altogether. It's like watching a once proud machine slowly grind to a halt, piece by piece. Interestingly, the fate of Roman plumbing varied across the empire. In some areas, particularly in the east, where the Byzantine Empire continued, Roman water systems were maintained and even improved upon. Constantinople, for example, had a sophisticated network of aqueducts and cisterns that kept the city supplied with water for centuries after the fall of Rome. But in the West, the story was much bleaker. Many cities were abandoned, and their aqueducts fell into ruin. The knowledge of how to build and maintain such systems was largely lost, and people reverted to relying on wells, rivers, and rainwater, much like their ancestors before the rise of Rome. It's a full circle moment, really. Back to square one. Only this time, everyone is a little bit dirtier. One quirky tidbit. Some historians believe that the decline in Roman sanitation contributed to outbreaks of disease, which further weakened the empire. Think about it. If the aqueducts are broken, the sewers are overflowing, and everyone is drinking questionable water, you're basically creating a breeding ground for bacteria and pestilence. It's like a giant, empire-sized petri dish. And nobody wants that. Now, here's a fun fact for you. While it's commonly believed that the barbarians were solely responsible for the destruction of Roman infrastructure, that's not entirely true. Natural disasters, such as earthquakes and floods, also played a significant role in damaging aqueducts and other water systems. Mother Nature, it seems, was not a fan of Roman plumbing either. And what about those lead pipes we talked about earlier? Did lead poisoning contribute to the decline of the Roman Empire? Historians still argue about this. Some believe that chronic lead exposure could have led to cognitive impairment and other health problems, potentially affecting the decision-making abilities of Roman leaders. Others argue that the levels of lead in the water were not high enough to cause significant harm. The debate rages on, like a never-ending plumbing problem. You stand there, amidst the ruins, and you realize that the story of Roman plumbing is more than just a tale of pipes and aqueducts. It's a story about innovation, engineering, and the rise and fall of civilizations. It's a reminder that even the most advanced technologies can be lost if they are not properly maintained and valued. And it's a cautionary tale about the importance of, well, flushing regularly. So, as the sun sets over the ruins of Rome, casting long shadows across the broken aqueducts and overgrown bathhouses, you can't help but feel a little melancholic. The glory of Rome is gone, and with it, its magnificent water systems. But remember, even in decline, there are lessons to be learned, and perhaps a newfound appreciation for your own, hopefully functional, plumbing. Now, wasn't that just riveting? Legacy, Roman plumbing's enduring influence. And now, my friend, as the evening deepens and the crickets chirp their lullaby, we reach the twilight of our Roman plumbing saga. Think about it. For hours you've been swimming in the world of aqueducts and, well, let's just say effluent. But before you drift off completely, let's ponder the echoes of Roman ingenuity that still ripple through our modern world. You're standing in your own bathroom now. Notice the porcelain throne, the gleaming faucets, the shower that pours forth a torrent of clean, temperature-controlled water. Take a moment to appreciate it. All of it. Because, whether you realize it or not, you're standing on the shoulders of Roman giants, or at least, standing on the descendants of their pipes. The most obvious legacy, of course, is the very concept of plumbing itself. While other ancient civilizations had rudimentary forms of water management, the Romans were the first to develop sophisticated, large-scale systems that brought clean water into cities and efficiently removed waste. Their aqueducts, sewers, and public baths set a precedent for urban sanitation that wouldn't be matched for centuries. Think about the word plumbing itself. It comes from the Latin word plumbum, which, as you might remember from our discussion on the dangers of heavy metal poisoning, means lead. Yes, the Romans inadvertently named an entire industry after a substance that probably shaved years off their lives. Irony, thy name is Roman plumbing. You turn on your faucet. The water flows, seemingly effortlessly. But behind that simple act lies a complex network of pipes, pumps, and treatment facilities, a direct descendant, albeit a much more advanced one, of the Roman aqueduct system. The principles are the same: harnessing gravity, channeling water over long distances, and distributing it to where it's needed. Now, here's a mainstream historical fact for you. Many European cities, even today, still utilize sections of original Roman aqueducts. Repaired and integrated into modern water systems, these ancient structures continue to provide a reliable source of fresh water. It's like having a 2,000-year-old infrastructure project still paying dividends. Not bad, eh? And it wasn't just about getting water in. The Romans were also remarkably adept at getting waste out. The Cloaca Maxima, that granddaddy of all sewers, is still partially functional today, draining rainwater and wastewater into the Tiber River. I mean, it's been upgraded, of course. They didn't just leave it as a hole in the ground, probably. It stands as a testament to Roman engineering prowess and their understanding of the importance of sanitation. Consider the design of your own sewage system. It relies on the same basic principles as the Roman system: gravity-fed pipes, underground tunnels, and a central collection point. Sure, we have fancy things like sewage treatment plants now, but the fundamental concept remains the same. You flush, it goes away, and you don't have to think about it. That's the Roman legacy in action. Let's move on to a quirky tidbit, shall we? You might be surprised to learn that some historians believe the Romans actually had a rudimentary form of flushing toilet. Not in every home, mind you, but in some of the more luxurious villas. They would use a system of running water to flush waste into a cesspool or sewer. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's not exactly a modern flushing toilet. And you're right, it wasn't. But it was a step in that direction. It was the proto-flush, if you will. Imagine the look on a visiting barbarian's face when they saw that. Pure magic. You step into your shower, adjusting the water temperature to your liking. Hot water on demand. Another luxury we owe, in part, to the Romans. Their hypocaust system, which we discussed earlier, was a marvel of engineering that allowed them to heat entire buildings, including bathhouses and villas. While we use gas, electricity, or solar power to heat our water, the basic principle remains the same, using a central heating source to distribute warmth throughout a space. And speaking of bathhouses, remember the Roman obsession with cleanliness and hygiene? While their understanding of germ theory was, shall we say, lacking, they intuitively understood the importance of bathing for health and well-being. Their public baths were not just places to get clean, but also social centers where people could relax, exercise, and socialize. You might be thinking, well, we have gyms and spas now. We don't need public baths. And that's true. But the underlying principle is the same, creating spaces where people can prioritize their physical and mental health. The modern gym, with its showers, saunas, and workout equipment, is a direct descendant of the Roman bathhouse, albeit with less toga wearing and more spandex. Now, for a scholarly debate. Historians still argue about the extent to which Roman plumbing contributed to the decline and fall of the empire. Some argue that the widespread use of lead pipes poisoned the Roman population, leading to infertility, cognitive impairment, and other health problems. This lead poisoning theory suggests that the Romans were, in effect, slowly poisoning themselves from the inside out. Others argue that the lead poisoning theory is overblown. They point out that the Romans were aware of the dangers of lead and took precautions to minimize their exposure. They also argue that other factors, such as political instability, economic decline, and barbarian invasions, played a much larger role in the fall of the empire. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in the middle. Lead poisoning likely contributed to the decline of the Roman Empire, but it was not the sole or even the primary cause. It was just one of many factors that conspired to bring down one of the greatest civilizations in history. You reach for your soap, lathering up and rinsing away the day's grime. It's a simple act, but one that is deeply rooted in history. The Romans, with their aqueducts, sewers, and public baths, laid the foundation for our modern sanitation systems. They showed us the importance of clean water, efficient waste removal, and public hygiene. And even though they made some mistakes along the way, like, poisoning themselves with lead, their contributions to the field of plumbing are undeniable. So, the next time you flush your toilet, take a shower, or simply turn on your faucet, remember the Romans. Remember their ingenuity, their ambition, and their enduring legacy. And maybe, just maybe, spare a thought for the poor plumbers who had to crawl through those dark, smelly sewers. They were the unsung heroes of the Roman Empire, and they deserve our gratitude. And now, my friend, as the water swirls down the drain and the last vestiges of the day fade away, it's time to close your eyes and drift off to sleep. Dream of aqueducts, bathhouses, and maybe even a slightly cleaner version of the Cloaca Maxima. Sweet dreams, and may your pipes always run clear. Just try not to think too much about where that water has been. Good night. And so, as the mighty Roman Empire began to fade, so too did the intricate network of aqueducts, baths, and sewers that had defined its sophisticated approach to water management. The constant vigilance required to maintain these marvels of engineering slowly waned, the knowledge of their construction becoming a distant echo. Imagine now the sounds of rushing water, once a constant presence in Roman life, gradually diminishing. The grand thermae, once filled with laughter and conversation, falling silent, their warm waters growing cold. The intricate lead pipes, once delivering life-giving water, slowly corroding, their silent threat receding into the earth. Let the image of these magnificent structures gently dissolve in your mind. The echoes of splashing water, the murmur of voices, the gentle warmth of the hypocaust, all fading into the quiet stillness of the night. The grandeur of Roman engineering, once so vibrant, now softening into a distant memory. Allow yourself to drift, carried on the currents of these fading images. Release the weight of history, the echoes of the past, and simply breathe. Let your mind become as clear and still as the water once flowing through those ancient aqueducts, now resting peacefully in the quiet darkness.